Hello and welcome to How Would You Rate Your Pain? We will be exploring life, loss, love, and the power of resilience. I am Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to go on this journey with you. Hello and welcome to another episode of How Would You Rate Your Pain? I am so excited to have my new friend, Brian, with me today. And Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Brian Ammons. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I am a spiritual director, and I work with an organization called the Porch that does work on transformative storytelling. But before that, I was a college chaplain for about 9 years. I've been ordained within the Alliance of Baptist Tradition for about 20 years. So I've been working in ministry and higher education context mostly for most of my adult life.
Yeah, so that is a lot of years of service under your belt for that. And I have to tell everybody, part of Brian's work is these transformative events that take place in Ireland. And so what better reason to take a trip than to go for a transformational retreat? Yeah.
My husband's from Northern Ireland. And so I spent half my year in Belfast area, just outside of Belfast, and the other half of my year in Asheville. And we lead groups over to Northern Ireland to talk about storytelling and spirituality and the peace building process in a post-conflict society. I feel like we could spend several episodes just talking about those things. But I love that. So I have, in fact, been online Googling all the next events and everything because it sounds... Great. You'll have to come see us.
Really wonderful. Yeah, I've been only to the airport in Dublin. Just spent like 3 hours there. So I can't say I've actually been to Ireland. So we'll get into a little bit about like what brought you to Ireland later, but I would love for listeners to hear your story of how you got into ministry and like what that path was for you, growing up and getting all the schooling that it takes to get ordained. Anything you want to start with?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 51. I turn 51 tomorrow, actually.
That's right.
So I'm, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in the central part of North Carolina. My parents worked at a United Methodist Children's Home, and my father had grown up there as a resident, and my mom had grown up there like I did as a staff kid. So that was my camp. That campus was my core community, and the church on that campus was my home congregation as a kid. And I loved church. I was very much a church kid. I started talking about wanting to go into ministry when I was 5 or 6 years old, which the joke was because I could then get up and talk, and everybody had to listen to me.
They don't usually interrupt you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was at least the way that my mom tells that story. But I think it was always a core part of my life, and I loved it, and I felt like I belonged there. So by the time I was in high school in the late 80s, the volume got really turned up around the conversation about LGBTQ plus folks in ministry, and some of that. I mean, there's a lot going on in that. Some of that was because, as the Soviet Union crumbled and sort of the shift in communism, there was kind of culturally a need for a new scapegoat. And and the peak of the AIDS era, not that the AIDS era is over, but the peak of that chapter of that crisis, particularly gay men or men who slept with men were really the primary focus of that. So I watched my church get really vocal about the exclusion of LGBT folks, and not my local church,
but the denomination.
And my parents were involved at denominational meetings. So I went to those meetings with my dad quite a bit as a youth and young adult. And I was involved at the conference level. So I ended up in teaching, which, I mean, also wasn't a terribly safe place at that time. And there was a lot of public conversation about gay teachers as well. Some of which we're seeing repeated right now around trans teachers. But there was more of a distance between my life outside of school and my life in school than I could pull off in churches. And I loved working with young people. So it was, I ended up then with a career that lived with a foot in education world and a foot in ministry. I went back, I left church altogether when I was about 18, or church left me. I'm not sure which one. I had real clarity about who I was, clarity about my own belief system, and a real disillusionment with where the church was going, and felt really abandoned and pretty hurt by that. In my late 20s, I stumbled into a church. I was living in Raleigh at the time, a church that had made the move to be fully affirming and inclusive. And I remember sitting down in the associate pastor's office, who's now the pastor, and saying, I'm terrified to be here because I'm afraid if I come back to church, I'm going to end up in seminary. And that seems like a really dumb career move because you've got the one job in North Carolina that'll take us.
Oh, wow.
And she laughed. And so I was right on the cusp of that. I mean, I was right in there were a handful of people that had been working in ministry that came out. But I was really in that sort of first wave of people that were out when we were going through ordination processes.
Wow.
In this part of the world, at least. It was happening in Massachusetts and California earlier, but certainly in the South. And in North Carolina, I think I was, in the first 5.
Wow.
So
So no precedents, no footsteps to follow in, none of that.
What was really amazing, I had incredible mentors who were mostly women in ministry that were a generation older than me. And so I came into Baptist life, which is a little hard to explain, but that is a big conversation around church governance because theoretically, and at least in some forms of Baptist life, local churches can make those decisions. And so there was a local church that was willing to ordain me, that one that I went into when I was 27. And there had been a lot of Baptist women that had navigated that same route. And I felt really lucky to be kind of taken under their wing. And I remember a woman who became later in my life here in Asheville was my pastor and has been a mentor for a long time. And I remember the first time that I saw her from the pulpit and was like, oh, this is how we do this. Because she was fierce and graceful and managed to hold this space where she knew she was disruptive by her very presence, but was like, my job here is to be a minister and to do that well. And I'm not going to let them decide that I don't belong here. So I got to, really towards the end of her career, spend an awful lot of time with her around, and by that point I had been in ministry for a while, but just around sort of what the process was of navigating it. And we were doing workarounds, right? Like we weren't getting good church jobs. We were figuring out other ways to stay in ministry. Lots of us ended up in chaplaincy. For which I'm deeply grateful because chaplaincy was a great space for me. So that's the rough sketches of it.
No, that's so helpful. So, in some ways you had like maybe footsteps like adjacent to kind of like not guide, but like you knew like this is what it could look like and this is what people do. And I think that it's nice too to see how, somebody can lean into being fierce and disruptive by existing in those spaces, but then also staying true to like the reason that you wanted to go into ministry, which is, to help people and to serve them. And so nice to be able to see like somebody doing that, even if they're a little bit different.
Yeah. And it was fascinating to me. I mean, particularly in my first church job. My first church job, I was a minister with youth and young adults at that church in Raleigh. I ended up, after seminary, coming back to work there. And within the church, I was the youth minister. When I stepped out of the church, I was the gay youth minister. Like the rest of the world, it was a really big deal. And I never pretended I wasn't in that church. I mean, I went there with my partner. It was, but I had space to be good at youth ministry. But I don't think I have ever been so conscious of my own queerness as when I was in that space. Because it was just when I was in that job, because the rest of the world was very tuned into it. And so I'm like, if people knew me, that's what they knew about me. And that was and that was challenging. I recognized that, I had to carry the pressure of, I had other people in my network that were in similar places, but, and a couple other people at that very church, but, we were carrying all of those projections for good and ill. Either people really wanted to be close to us because we were marking them as a particular kind of Christian by being in relationship with us, or people were really stood against us, or for me, because the other folks in North Carolina at the time that were ordained were all women, that there was this experience of men and probably some non-binary folks too, who were seeing me, and then like my particular body being in that space in a robe and a stole meant something that wasn't so much even about me. It was just that I became this symbol of their belonging. And that was challenging too. About who they needed me to be and all of that. Yeah.
Well, and I know that
this was all like early 2000s, right? So by 2003 by that time. Yeah.
So much is going on in the world, and I wonder kind of how that was for you to be like representing so much, or have, single parts of your identity being so disproportionately, important or visible. How did you navigate that within yourself? Because, I can kind of sense just that we've talked together before now, that your care for people and your desire to do good in the world really shines through. But also, permission to be human as well. And so how has that been for you to kind of, be a person while also stepping into these spaces and, doing the wonderful work you've been doing?
Oh, that's sweet of you to ask. I became very conscious of it when I was in divinity school. So I went to a divinity school that was new. I was in the second class, and there was a woman in the class ahead of me who married her partner during the first year that the school was open. That became a national news story.
Oh, wow.
So they had done their wedding, and it was before marriages were legal, so the blessing of their union, whatever, but their wedding. And then like the volume had just gotten really turned up loud. So it was a bit of a pressure cooker. And I realized very quickly that if I was going to be in that space, then I had to be prepared to talk about it all the time. Like I had to.
Okay.
I went off to California for a summer, to Berkeley, to study in a seminary, to do all the stuff that I could. I'll get all of the queer theology I could absorb. I read everything that was coming out, which wasn't a ton at that time. So like literally, I was actually just looking at my bookshelf the other day, wanting to clear out books. And I was like, these belong in an archive. Like, I have everything that was published.
Wow.
In those
Wow.
3 or 4 years around, that was affirming of LGBT folks in church. And so I just sort of embrace that this is going to be part of it. If I'm going to be here and do this, it means that I'm going to have to know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to have to be an expert in my own experience, but also become an expert in the sort of theological grounding. And really at that point, we were still spending a lot of energy in making a case for why we could belong in church. And right at that moment, started to shift to say, like, okay, there's something beyond just making a case for our existence to actually doing theology from where we stand. So I got to be there, like, right in that moment, in this place of saying, like, what's it mean to actually think theologically as someone from my life that's lived my life and had my experiences. And so I've really got to ride that wave, which has been really cool and a lot of fun.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was very mentally stimulating and also challenging. And there was a lot of like work that you did to be able to like fill that role that you felt like you were stepping into or being brought into. But a lot of like intellectual work, not just this is how I feel and this is how I experience, life in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like part of my formal academic education is in gender studies. And I don't know that it would have been. And like, I was always interested in gender studies, but I recognized I had to be able to make the case. And I did. I spent a lot of time getting invited to sit on panels. I sat on panels with ex-gays. I sat on panels with people that not only didn't think that I could be a Christian, some who thought that I was, either, had a demon or was I was part of what was going to, of like the devil's plot to bring down the church. I mean, like it was, and I made a conscious choice, and I got careful as to which one of those invitations I would say yes to. I knew that I had to be prepared to be 2 steps ahead. I had to know my stuff, and I had to know it really well. And it's been wild to watch that change over the last 20 years.
I bet.
21 years, yeah.
The bookcase got bigger.
Yeah, and it also just, it got to be not as big a deal in a lot of places. And honestly, by the time that I was applying to be a college chaplain, they were far more nervous about the fact that I was Baptist than they were about the fact that I was queer. Which was and it's like, oh, this is not the way I'm usually. Like I spent 20 years kind of
with like justifying or explaining and like, humanizing this other identity. Yeah.
Right. And now I'm going to now I'm in a space where I'm going like, I have to justify and explain like, no, I'm actually really into Jesus. And actually there's something in the Baptist way of talking about that really resonates me and is really important to me.
Yeah.
And which confused a lot of people, but I have, I've been a walking contradiction for a good long while now.
Was there like context switching that had to take place for you to go into spaces where there were like unsafe people? Like what was that like, to sit next to somebody that thinks that like you're lost or like,
or dangerous.
Or dangerous. Yeah, dangerous.
Lost were the easy ones.
Okay.
I was like, okay, I'm okay. Like, like I don't I had to get really clear that I didn't need their approval. I had, my sense of call had been confirmed in my community. And I was really clear that I didn't need the whole world to confirm that. I knew where I was and I knew who I was and what I was doing. So the ones that wanted to save me,
a little bit better than,
like I could at least find some space of going like, I know, I was like, I knew that they were acting out of how they were understanding their theology, and
Gotcha.
that they were acting out of a space that they thought was loving. And I could say, I'm not experiencing this as loving, but I can sit with you and we can figure this out, and we can find these things that we actually really do agree on, and I could be in that space. The ones that thought I was dangerous, it was harder, because they came in really wanting to debunk me, to condemn me. And I mean, and I bumped into protesters. Like, good grief, it felt like Fred Phelps and that crowd were following me around for a while. They protested the schools I was teaching in, the places. I mean, and not even knowing me specifically, but because of policies that allowed me to be there. So like that stuff that was a little more exhausting. But I was very committed to being in the conversation, and to say, like, look, not everybody feels called to this conversation, and I'm willing to step into this because somebody needs to, and I'm willing to do the work to do that. And for me, it became as long as I had a place to go home to, then I could do it. And I was really clear, like, I can't do this unless I've got some place to go home to that feels, but a community, both a home, like my own personal home, but also a community where where it wasn't contested. I needed to have that experience. It's just too hard to stay in that all the time. It takes its toll. And it took its toll on the relationship I was in. I was in a relationship for about 18 years. And it was really hard for my partner, who was both proud of me, but also didn't want to get swept up in it. And so very much pulled back from any of that. And there were other people that had higher profile and had a bigger target on their back. But I did my fair share of that.
Yeah. Sounds like, it's a bit of a sacrifice. I think, any kind of advocacy work there's so much sacrifice that comes from yourself, from your community, from your family. But then when you're advocating for yourself and people, like yourself, it's kind of an extra layer of like, stickiness for some of that. What do you think helped you to feel, you mentioned like you know who you are, you're good, like that security that you had kind of in yourself. Sounds like it's something that kind of like was with you, through all of this. Where do you think that came from for you?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. And the biggest is that I grew up at this children's home church, which wasn't a particularly radical church. I mean, they were solidly kind of moderate, kind of a social gospel kind of church of that believed very much in trying to make the lives of the kids at that home better. That was the community that I grew up in. And like 85% of the church were kids at the home, and the rest of them were staff families, which included my parents and grandparents, my grandparents were still working there when I was a kid. So I was, and the clear message I got in that church was, you're a beloved child of God and nobody can take that from you.
Wow.
Which was a really important message for that community, right? For a group of, for a church that was mostly about young people who had been treated very badly. So that was my foundation. And sort of everything else that I learned about my faith tradition came out of that, was this, you are loved. It was a Jesus loves the little children church. And so I grew up in that. So when later the church at large tried to tell me that wasn't true, I was like, you don't get to take that back. Like, you've been telling me since I was born that I was beloved. Like, you don't get to tell me now that, like, it just doesn't make sense. So I was very fortunate in that. And my parents, it's been a journey with my parents. They struggled in the beginning, and honestly, I mean, I think they struggled out of their own fear of what my life was going to look like. it was, I think, less of I don't think they really understood. But they believed me and they trusted me and my own articulation of my experience and identity. It was super hard for them. They had to let go of a lot of dreams for what my life was going to look like. And it was really hard at that point to imagine that I would have the life that I've had.
That you would be like safe and fulfilled and in other beloved communities. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think they were really scared that it was going to be lonely and that it was going to be and that I was in danger. And those things were true. To be fair. But I remember the conversation with my mother, which was a hard one. We had a lot of those in my early 20s, but I remember the conversation where I was like, you told me that the one thing that you can't handle is if I lie. If I lie to you. And I was like, I can't lie. So when I went back, I was teaching for 4 years. I've worked in higher ed for a year in the midst of that. And before I went back to divinity school, and when I went back to tell them, I think I have to do this. And I'm scared because there's no way for me to do this. And like at that point, I'd been in a relationship for like 9 or 10 years. I was like, I don't get to do this and pretend that I'm not bringing all of me with me. And she said, if that's yours to do, you got to do it.
I love that. Yeah.
And it was, but I was always conscious of when I was out in any public spaces, and particularly when I was in Methodist spaces, that like I was dragging them into this with me. And they managed to kind of keep some degree of distance from it, but partly because I left Methodist world and I was hanging out in other spaces. But I was always conscious of like, this has implications for other people who love me. And I'm a lot more prepared for this than they are. But they were pretty clear that they were, I was like, look, the one thing I know is that I can come home. I need to come home with you, to you. And over time, we really got there. So we've got a great relationship with them now. But it was, there was a good decade in there where it was tough. It was tough for all of us. We just didn't know how to do it. And we didn't have many models for it. It's not like we knew lots of other families that had queer kids that were figuring out how to do this. It was, we were living in a fairly small city in North Carolina, and it just, all of that has changed so radically.
It has.
So radically.
It has, for sure.
Not
there's
that
still
it's easy.
work to be done. Yeah. But I think
not that it's easy, but like at least people know that there's there's ways to do it. And we just didn't have that. It
can be done. Yeah. And I think that as a parent, I think there's no spaces we don't want to follow our children into. But I have so much empathy for your family having to do hard work that, if you think about it, it's kind of silly. What a silly world we live in where, people have to work this hard to explain themselves or to, say, no, I get to live in more than one world and you can't tell me what my values are. And, I think the constructs of it, if we really take that 40,000 foot look at it, it's like, why do we do that to families and to people and say they have to choose? Because I know a lot of my clients feel like they have to choose between their faith and being truthful, like you said, and I love how you brought back to your family, to your community, these are the principles, these are the values that you taught me. I'm living by them. So you can't have a problem with this and you can't do takebacks because I'm just doing what you taught me to do. But yeah, what would you I guess I'm curious, your thoughts on, what is happening when people feel like they have to choose, and how do we like, what do we do with that?
Yeah, I think there's two things that come to mind there. One is back when I was doing those talks and I was getting invited into churches a lot to have this conversation. I was saying, like, look, regardless of whether or not you're ready for me to be here, my mama is. Like,
yeah.
And my sister is, and like, there are families in your church that this is part of their family life. And I know way too many people who lost their church because someone they love came out. And they couldn't figure out how to reconcile what they were hearing on Sundays with this child that they loved.
Yeah.
And that was my thing of going, like, you got to figure out, there's either deafening silence and pretending that it wasn't a reality, or there was open condemnation.
Yeah.
So, like, that was, so I was very conscious of that. I think, but I do think it is, church spaces and political spaces, and we can't pretend that those aren't lined up in contemporary American culture. Like, I mean, it's identity. Like, you're asking folks to say, like, not just to change their mind about an idea, but it is a potentially to lose your whole community. And I think that's been an important piece for me to recognize along the way, that as people are working through where they come down in their support of LGBTQ folk, that for some folks, it means leaving everything you know.
This is
to
so
make
scary.
that statement.
Okay.
And that is when I think about, my parents and my grandparents and even some of my peers, just getting, like, there's huge cost. And I think that's deeply wrong and deeply problematic that the church has set up that system and the political cultures have set up that system. But it wasn't just I'm changing my mind about a political stance or even a theological nuance. It was I am potentially risking my entire community, and for many people, livelihoods, because so many people end up working in church systems.
And
that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal. And I don't know that folk who have, I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a pragmatist, but like or an incrementalist. I've been accused of not moving fast enough, and I'm like, I'm willing to go out here, right? Exactly. It's always some of that, but there's a part of me that's like, I at least want to move with compassion, towards people that are
struggling,
recognizing like this isn't just a shift in worldview; it's a shift in a whole way of navigating community and institutions and identity. That's a big thing. I spent a lot of time when I was a college chaplain. We had a really large LGBTQ plus community at the school where I was working. And I spent a lot of time sitting with kids who were waiting for their parents to catch up. And trying to figure out how to say, like, here's what I'm willing to tolerate. Here's what where I'm willing to be in order to take care of myself. And also have some compassion for what was being asked of the people that loved them. And so that's a tricky game. And I don't think and there's not a single answer to it. I mean, for some folks, there was real need for space and for cutting off some contact for a while. And for other folks, it was, let me be in here with you in this. that's tricky.
It's such hard work, though. And I think, when we think about being an ally, it's a lot of like, oh, I'm going to donate to this organization. I'm going to have like a gay friend and like, all these things. But like, what about coming alongside families? What about, making those rough places just a little bit easier, holding a hand as they go through and being like, I don't know what the answer is either, if you don't, but like, let me walk alongside you while you figure it out.
And I have to say, in the last 10, 15 years, particularly in the last decade, and particularly in evangelical circles, which I don't really come out of evangelical world. I know I'm Baptist, but I'm in this group of Baptists that looks less evangelical than whatever the markers are and however we define that. There's been lots of networks, and particularly networks of moms that have started to pop up that are trying to support one another through like, I'm not willing to make this choice. And it's not okay that my church is asking me to make this choice. And then slowly kind of going through whatever their processes are. But people are finding each other. And, so the internet was being born at the same time that I was coming out. So a lot's changed just in people being able to connect with other people.
Virtual spaces. And I think that you bring up a great point, because I think as a therapist, I'm often like front row to people who are having difficult experiences just by nature of the subset of the population that I see, which is the struggling part, But I think it is helpful to know, to kind of look at the history and say, okay, it's not where it needs to be, but it's not where it was. And, I think anything that has to do with like civil rights movements at all, it's just easy to get kind of hopeless or, just feel like, all right, I give up, there's nothing I could do, I'm powerless. But we already have done some, people like you have been doing this kind of work for decades. And so I think that's a nice, kind of like zoom out a little bit to, get a little context on the situation.
I will say within, there is a reality that in LGBT movements, stuff has moved more quickly than they have in lots of other movements for social change. I think it faster than it has for women, certainly faster than it has for people of color. Like we've seen radical shifts happen very quickly in terms of cultural acceptance and shifting values and norms and availability of resources and support. So it's easier to see it. Like I get how different my life is than people that were a generation ahead of me. And I get how different my life is from the people who are a generation behind me. And when I hang out with my friends' kids now, we don't have kids, but when I hang out with my friends' kids who are, middle school and high school age, this conversation just doesn't feel like they just don't even understand why this is a big whoop. It's kind of mind blowing to me just to go like and certainly not true for everybody, and certainly that's different from place to place. And I live in Asheville, right? So, but massive shifts that were incomprehensible. The idea of coming out in high school to me was like I can't even imagine. Like we all waited till we left home. I mean, there was just no sense of that was even a possibility. So
now it might be still hard, but it's possible. So.
Sure, exactly. And I don't want to, I was in a pivotal generation. I've been a part of a pivotal generation, but there were generations for like way ahead of me that were doing this work. The groundwork for this has been being laid for a long time. We had a moment in the early 90s where stuff started to shift pretty rapidly.
So what would you say, to listeners who might feel like they're, being asked by their communities to make that choice, and they maybe just like it didn't seem possible for, people to come out in high school. maybe there's still like a lot of difficulty feeling like it's possible to have both, to not have to surrender your faith in your religious, community, to be honest or to be true to another part of yourself.
Yeah, it's there's some nuance in that question.
You can redo the question if it needs to be different.
Because I think it is you may lose your community.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that there's truth in that, and I think it would be naive to suggest that that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And there are multiple Christianities out there. I mean, the thing that feels different from when I was in high school was that I think folks know that there are churches that are affirming. Right? They may feel foreign, and they may feel really scary, and they may feel really, and often have been maligned by other communities. And honestly, when I left Methodist world, it was easier for me to imagine leaving church altogether than not being Methodist. I just didn't have a sense of, it was so much the air that I breathed, that it was.
You loved church. You loved church.
I loved it. Yeah. And it was, and I had deep networks, and it was very much a part of this larger thing. And it was harder for me to imagine, I actually knew the church that I ended up eventually going to existed, but it took me years to get, at least 4 or 5 years to step foot into that church, because it was so hard for me to imagine being a part of another version of Christianity, which actually turned out to be a whole lot like the Christianity that I grew up in. It's just really, I'm very fortunate in that my values and ethics are very much aligned with my childhood church. Just the conversations that we're having have expanded. And not everybody that was in that church would agree with me, but certainly that's my experience. And I have a relationship with that, with my childhood pastor, and I'm really grateful. I don't know anybody
wonderful. That
grew up in the U.S. South who's, we were at a family funeral, and he wanted to meet my partner because he had followed me on Facebook. And so I had that experience.
Wow.
In my 40s of my childhood pastor being very clear that he saw me, he knew me, he had known me my whole life. And he wanted to know the person I was spending my life with.
That's beautiful.
So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, that's a rare experience. And the other thing is that not all churches start from the place that you're a beloved child of God. I think Jesus starts from that place. I think it's pretty.
Yeah. But it's like the New Testament, right?
That message gets lost, or at least gets downplayed, or feels a little schizophrenic of kind of, God loves you, and God will destroy you, kind of coming out at the same time in ways that I know so many folks that have really wrestled with this sense of deep shame and condemnation, and around sexuality in general. I think we get LGBTQ folk are kind of pushed to face that in particular ways and to talk about it in particular ways, but we're not the only people that end up with really screwed up messages about about desire and sexuality and its place in our lives. There's better stories, is what I would say. There's other versions out there. Keep looking. We're out here.
So maybe it's it's important to like you were saying before, have those spaces, make those spaces for yourself and figure out where they are. And, it's okay to grieve, obviously, if you do end up losing that community, or if you lose some ties or get to keep some, like you got to keep, some a little bit that there's other communities. Like you can have your faith and a faith community, even if, the thing that you want isn't the thing that you need, to be able to be healthy as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, I think it's important just to recognize that there's other versions of this. And I also get, like, for some people, the only faithful choice is to leave. Like that there's some space of going, like, and I certainly I've known people that have come back into churches that were more affirming, and it felt important to them to know that was there, that was an option, but that the wounding was so deep from within church community that it was just
too re-traumatizing. Yeah,
even to be in those spaces. And I understand that. And God's a lot bigger than the church. I believe in church. I think church really matters. I think community really matters. But I think the church thinks too highly of itself when it thinks that we're the only space through which God can break into the world.
Sorry about that sound. So I think one thing that really stood out that you said too was this idea of like instilling the preciousness, that children have or people have from such a young age. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the, I think it's the World Health. No, it's not World Health Organization. One of those like global happiness reports. And they were talking about how happiness kind of tracks like as a you. Like you start out really happy, children are really happy, you kind of have a dip in like adolescence and adulthood. And then as you get to be like empty nesters, happiness goes up again. But they're finding that in America, one side of the U is flattening. Like our children aren't happy and they aren't, experiencing those levels. And happiness isn't the goal, but you're talking about like happiness in relation to overall quality of life and, positive affect. And so, just kind of made me think about that this morning as I was listening of like, our children, no matter what identity they're going to figure out about themselves or where they're going to go or what they're going to do, just the importance of instilling in them that inner resource of, I am beloved and I am precious. And if you're part of a faith community, you have, beloved of God, not just of your family, but, just that basic sense of like you are good and you are lovable and important and seen. I think we miss that sometimes in all of the parenting books and techniques and all the things that we're worried about giving our children academic and sports advantages and, getting them into the perfect college. When the most important thing, starts maybe at that building block.
Yeah, I think there's a, it's interesting, I'm not a parent and I have spent an awful lot of time with other people's children. Professionally and personally. But there's a parallel kind of body of research and teaching that, I believe in really good, sound teaching methods, understanding how we're working in a classroom. I think there's
pedagogy.
Better ways to teach. Pedagogy matters, right? There's been multiple studies, and I don't have this data in front of me, but there's been multiple studies over the years that when people talk about their favorite teachers, the things that they know most were that they were passionate about their students and they were passionate about what they were teaching.
Okay.
So even the most traditional old school standing behind a podium lecturer who loves what they're talking about and loves the people that they're talking to.
Yeah.
Those are the teachers we remember.
Right? Same. That's what I remember. Yeah. I didn't even like the classes that my favorite teachers taught. They were like my least favorite classes because I hated the content. But I knew that the teacher cared about me. And so when we see that in
and
therapy
believed that the content was important, right?
Yeah. So they believed in it. Yeah.
And I think there's a parallel to that with what you were talking about with parenting around like, if our kids know that our parents believe in something,
Yeah.
and know that our parents believe in them, that's a pretty, that's a much more solid foundation. I think, and one of the experiences that so many queer folk have is that our parents believe in something, and we are told either by them or by the world that they will choose that belief over their belief in me if it comes into conflict.
Okay.
And so it's a sense of going like, it's a conditional belovedness.
But we teach that, don't you think? A lot of religions teach that, like, if you're good, if you do these things, then like you get love. And then we kind of like live that out in our parenting, and we live that in our relationships, where we see all this like stonewalling happening and, passive aggressiveness of trying to get into in to do what I want you to do or be who I want you to be. And it could take so many different forms. But, they say that the largest benefit of therapy is just presence, just sitting with someone who has that like Rogerian unconditional positive regard. And I think that, it's all the same, right? Whether it's teaching or parenting or ministering, from a pulpit or being a therapist, it gets back to just, do we love people? Do they know it? And is that kind of where we start from?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, part of what I loved about being a college chaplain, like tiny percentage of our students identified within my religious tradition. And even those who did often identified in very different variations of our religious tradition than I did. But my job was just to show up and be present. I mean, literally the first thing on my job description was to be a presence on campus. My job was just to show up and be like, okay, I see you. And all of this matters. And all of this is kind of small in the grand scheme of things. And, to be able to be in a role where I could call a community to a greater moral vision was a real gift. But most of what that looked like was just listen to what was going on in people's lives. Vast majority of students that ever walked through my door, if they thought at all about that they had set up an appointment with the chaplain, they were uncomfortable with it. But they had come to know that I was somebody on campus, and staff too. That I was somebody on campus that would see them and love them wherever they were, to meet them, would meet them where they were. And that was driven out of my own faith commitments and spiritual life, but I didn't have any need for other folk to meet me and to match me there. I do this as an expression of my spirituality. Because it's what it calls me into. But I'm going to meet you wherever you are. And that was real. I'm a big fan of chaplaincy. I think chaplaincy is a powerful form of ministry because we get beyond the walls of the church too. I was dealing with folk all day, every day who did not identify as church folk, or who were deeply committed in other religious traditions and still allowed me to sit with them.
Have that soul space. I love that. So speaking of soul space, what brought you to start your work in Ireland? I'm so curious. Did you pick the place or do you have ties to Ireland? Can I ask that?
Yeah, my husband's from there. That's really what it was.
Okay.
I married into it. I did that job at the college for 9 years and I loved it and it was amazing. It was also really hard. Because it was sitting with a lot of people in a lot of pain. And higher education is in a hard moment right now. And so there were lots of reasons that it was just clear that it was time for me to make a change. And it was a hard it was a hard time for folks who didn't, well, it was a hard time for lots of folks, but, as partner to someone who wasn't from the States and wasn't from the South, and
Yeah.
we were in a moment that he needed a break.
Yeah.
And so we left and we went back for a while, and there was a second lockdown during the pandemic and in the UK and Northern Ireland, and so we arrived the day that the second lockdown started. So we spent another we spent 3 months walking up and down the shore and hit a place of saying, like, whatever comes next, it needs to be at least as good as this. Part of my own story of vocation is that my identity has been so much wrapped up in my work that I really, and that I got a lot of medals. I got awards for showing up and extending and beyond what was reasonable to ask a person or a family system to manage. And I had to get that back in balance. So I have since done some work with some churches, and I've done some interim ministries, and I really love that work.
Yeah.
But we were sort of at a point where, like, we're in our late 40s and we don't have kids. What do we actually really want our life to look like? And we realized that we belong to both places.
I love that.
Southern Appalachia is really important to me. North Carolina is really important to me. And Northern Ireland is really important to him. And our voices are heard differently when we're in each other's homes, which are also our homes now, but that we get the gift of being a committed outsider that's been kind of vetted. Like, you're really in.
Yeah.
And there's things that you can get, you can see when you're outside a system. So Gareth, my spouse, is really good at sitting with folks in the States and helping them see the narratives that are driving us. And
I bet. And
I've been given some of that gift and going back over there. So that's kind of how that happened. The Ireland retreats were kind of a side gig. It was a sort of side hustle when I was working at the school, and Gareth was doing other work. And then I had summers off, or part of the summer off. And so we would take groups over, and
I love it.
And it kind of grew to be a pretty central part of who we are. But then we also do work with, like, we run film festivals, we do storytelling events, I do one-on-one work with folks. Gareth writes and does a lot of speaking. And so kind of throughout all of that, we recognize that the thread is transformative storytelling. How do we pay attention to the stories that are driving our lives? And then how do we tell better stories? And for us, better stories have a few key components. One is that they transcend us versus them narratives, but they do it in a way that also pay attention to power differentials. So it's not just hey, like, can't we all get along? It's like, how do we actually work towards a world that breaks down some of those oppressive systems, and that they are stories that usher more love into the world. If a story doesn't lead with love, then it's not a story that I'm going to put a lot of energy into telling or to living in. And I've had to, I grew up, I'm a queer Baptist in the South. Like, I grew up in a story that wasn't, though my family story had a whole lot of love in it, and I was lucky in that my childhood church had a whole lot of love in it. The story that I was given by the world hasn't necessarily been one that led with love. And so I think it matters. So we get to be a part of creating little practice communities where people can find like-spirited folk and have an experience for a few days where they lean into what happens if this is how we frame the stories, both on a personal level and on a societal and cultural level. I mean, Northern Ireland is a fascinating place. They're 25 years into a peace process, and it's not perfect. There's still big challenges going on.
Yeah.
And part of the gift of what I get to be a part of is going like, oh my goodness, look at all that you've accomplished in the last 25 years, which sometimes is easier to see from the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Still work to do probably, but work has been done. Yeah, and that's very encouraging.
Yeah. And I get to bring people from here who are, desperately wanting to figure out how do we live together in community with people that we disagree with, and still try and work for a better world. Like, how do we do that both and
which is what we need most.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We're ripe for it right now.
Sure.
So, Brian, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing.
I was going to say, there's all kinds of things that we talked about talking about that we didn't get to, but that's okay. We can do another one.
Next time. Yes, for sure. And so where can listeners find you and look at the work you're doing or look at the retreats in Ireland?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So our hub is the porchcommunity.net. And there's a newsletter, sort of an online magazine that comes out through that if you want to subscribe to it. But it's also links to Ireland retreats and to our Porch gathering, which happens in the springs here in Black Mountain near Asheville.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a great way to find us. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here again, Brian. It's really kind of a treat to know you. And now I have your phone number, so you might regret giving that to me. But I also want to thank our listeners for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know that, for some of you, this might be an uncomfortable topic, and that's okay. But for those of you who are kind of wondering where to begin, I think Brian said it best. We just begin with love. And that's a great starting place. I will see you guys all next time, and be gentle with yourselves. Thanks for listening to How Would You Rate Your Pain? Please subscribe on your favorite listening platform so you never miss an episode. And if this show made you think of someone, please share it with them to help us grow. I'm your host, Dr. Tiffany Bartell. You can find me on Instagram at the_happy_therapist_. This show is not intended as medical advice and should not take the place of therapy or other mental health services. Please consult with your doctor or mental health provider about your own health. You deserve all the support. How Would You Rate Your Pain is co-produced by WaveLength Studios and Chattanooga Podcast Studios and is part of the Podnooga Network. Graphic design provided by Josh Wilhem at JW Creates and music by Michael Crosa. I'm Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time right here on How Would You Rate Your Pain?